The bruises on Sarah's neck had barely faded when she made the phone call that would change everything. November 2023 had brought the worst night of her life. Her husband's hands wrapped around her throat, squeezing until darkness crept into the edges of her vision. It wasn't the first time he had hurt her. The summer arrest for domestic violence should have been her wake-up call. But like so many survivors, she had returned to him, hoping the man she once loved would somehow resurface from beneath the monster he had become. Now, with a restraining order in place and her ex-husband safely tucked away in a VA rehabilitation facility, Sarah thought she could finally breathe. His lawyer had orchestrated the rehab placement as a strategic move to keep him out of prison, and Sarah desperately wanted to believe this time would be different. For their children's sake, she prayed that sobriety might restore the father they deserved. But then came the devastating phone call from a concerned friend. Word had spread through their small community like wildfire. Her ex-husband was romantically involved with one of his nurses at the VA facility. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Here was a man who had nearly killed her just months earlier, supposedly focused on recovery. Yet he had found time to seduce a healthcare professional who was meant to facilitate his healing. Sarah stared at her phone for hours, torn between protecting herself and potentially destroying an innocent woman's career. The nurse had children to support, a livelihood that hung in the balance. But as Sarah's therapist gently reminded her, this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. How could her ex-husband truly commit to sobriety when he was busy manipulating vulnerable situations for personal gain? How could he focus on becoming a better father while pursuing forbidden relationships that violated professional boundaries? The VA's investigation moved with bureaucratic efficiency. When they finally contacted Sarah, the news was both validating and disturbing. The nurse would be terminated, but Sarah wasn't the only person who had reported the inappropriate relationship. Multiple witnesses had observed boundary violations, suggesting a pattern of unprofessional behavior that extended beyond a simple romance. The facility had documented concerns that went far deeper than Sarah's single phone call, but her ex-husband and his new girlfriend saw it differently. The text messages that flooded Sarah's phone were vicious and calculated, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. They called her evil, vile, a vindictive ex-wife who had destroyed an innocent woman's livelihood out of pure spite. They accused her of being a terrible mother, claiming their children's only hope for normalcy lay with them. The very man who had strangled their mother and the woman who had violated her professional ethics to be with him. The threats escalated quickly. They promised to show up at Sarah's workplace, to sabotage her new relationship, to make her life as miserable as possible. They attacked her intelligence, her appearance, her worth as a human being. In their twisted narrative, Sarah was the villain, and the nurse was merely a victim caught in the crossfire of a bitter divorce. The cruelest irony came in their final taunt. The nurse would simply return to work in the VA's business office, rendering Sarah's report meaningless. In their minds, Sarah had accomplished nothing except making herself look foolish and vindictive. But they had missed the point entirely. This had never been about punishment or revenge. It had been about holding people accountable for their choices and protecting the integrity of institutions meant to help vulnerable individuals. Sarah found herself questioning everything. Had she been wrong to make that call? Should she have considered the nurse's children, her financial obligations, her career? The guilt gnawed at her, especially when she realized this woman had apparently become the love of her ex-husband's life. What if Sarah had destroyed something genuine and beautiful out of her own pain and trauma? But then she remembered the hands around her throat, the terror in her children's eyes, the months of manipulation and abuse that had brought her to this point. Her ex-husband had a history of exploiting vulnerable situations, of using charm and desperation to get what he wanted. The nurse, regardless of her personal circumstances, had violated professional boundaries with a patient in a vulnerable state. Their relationship had emerged from a foundation of unethical behavior during a time when focus should have been on healing and recovery. Sarah realized that her motivations, while complex, had been fundamentally sound. She had wanted her ex-husband to succeed in recovery for their children's sake. She had wanted to protect the integrity of a system designed to help veterans heal. She had wanted accountability in a situation where power dynamics were inherently unbalanced. The harassment continued, but Sarah held firm in her decision. She had not acted out of malice, but out of concern for everyone involved, including future patients who might encounter similar boundary violations. Sometimes doing the right thing feels wrong, especially when others paint you as the villain. But Sarah had learned that surviving abuse meant trusting her own moral compass, even when the world tried to convince her she was lost. What do you think about Sarah's decision to report the inappropriate relationship? Was she protecting institutional integrity or acting out of spite? Should she have considered the nurse's personal circumstances? Share your thoughts on complex situations where doing the right thing isn't always clear.